Every woman wants to feel safe when with her man. But this hasn't always the case. Several men are on death row for killing their wives. Today, we will reveal these men and why they committed the heinous crime. Donald Broadnax. State, Alabama. Scheduled date of execution. Not defined. Donald is an American serial killer. In August 1977, the 16-year-old Broadnax argued with his friend, 19-year-old Gregory Manson, in the Elleton Village public housing community. Amid their scuffle, Broadnax pulled out a gun and fired 6 shots at Manson, who fell to the ground. After emptying his clip, Broadnax reloaded and fired 3 more shots into Manson's body before finally leaving the crime scene. Approximately 3 months later, he was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The following year, he was convicted and sentenced to 99 years imprisonment, with a chance of parole after serving several years. In 1986, Broadnax was paroled and returned to Birmingham. Within the next 2 years, he got into contact with Raymond Godfather Mims, a notorious local substance dealer who allowed him to live in one of his houses. The property was eventually raided by the police, who arrested Broadnax and seized several guns. As this was considered a violation of his parole, Broadnax was immediately returned to prison. In November 1992, he successfully applied for a work release program and was transferred to the Work Release Center in Alexander City. From there, Broadnax was hired as a painter for Wellborn Forest Products, where his employer described him as very mild-mannered and nice. Sometime around January 1994, Broadnax married Hector Jan Stamps, a 42-year-old woman from Sylacauga, who would often visit him in prison. On April 25th, Broadnax was allowed to leave prison to attend his job at the factory, where he managed to convince the supervisor that he would leave later. While working there, he was visited by his wife, who brought along her 4-year-old grandson, D'Angelo Marquez Stamps. After leaving the boy in the car, Stamps entered the factory, whereupon she was beaten to death with a plank by Broadnax. After the murder, Broadnax stuffed her body in the trunk of his white Dodge Aries and drove away with D'Angelo in the car. From there, Broadnax drove to an isolated section of Elleton Village, where he got D'Angelo out of the car and beat him to death. He then stuffed the boy's body in the trunk of the car and parked it in front of a vacant house. Broadnax then hitched a ride to the Work Release Center, where he attempted to hide his bloodied uniform and boots under his bed. The clothing was found by 2 other inmates and reported to the prison guards, who immediately detained Broadnax. After linking him to the double murder, Broadnax was charged with 2 counts of capital murder. In the aftermath of his arrest, the handling of the work release program came under heavy scrutiny, especially concerning the admission of potentially violent felons. In response to this, Wendell Mitchell, the leader of the Alabama Senate, proposed a bill that would eliminate the possibility of parole for certain sentences. However, he expressed doubt that it would manage to pass. On June 6, 1997, the jury found Broadnax guilty on all counts and recommended that he be sentenced to death. The verdict was met with relief from the victim's family members, while Broadnax and his family members wept. In September of that year, he was officially sentenced to death. Broadnax immediately appealed his sentence to the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals, which ruled 5-0 for a resentencing hearing after determining that the jury at the original trial had been incorrectly instructed regarding mitigating circumstances. Broadnax's death sentence was later upheld by the Court of Appeals in December 2000, along with those of 3 other death row inmates. Broadnax appealed again, arguing that he had received ineffective counsel, but the sentence was upheld again in December 2012. The Supreme Court denied another review of the case in June 2013. As of January this year, Broadnax remains on death row and is awaiting execution. Brown Lewis Black. State, Tennessee. Scheduled. Date of execution, August 5, 2025. On March 28, 1998, a mother and her 2 daughters were murdered at their house in Nashville, Tennessee. Before the triple murder, The mother, 29-year-old Angela Clay, was separated from her husband Benny Clay, who was also the father of their two daughters, 9-year-old Latoya Clay and 6-year-old Lakeisha Clay. Angela had a relationship with another man named Byron Lewis Black. However, in December 1986, Black was involved in a dispute with Benny, and he later shot and wounded Benny on the shoulder. As a result, Black was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment with work release for a felony charge of shooting Benny. While he was temporarily released due to his work release schedule, Black entered Angela and her daughter's home. He then shot and killed all 3 of them. Angela and Latoya were shot inside the master bedroom, with Angela shot once in the head while Latoya sustained gunshots to the neck and chest. Lakeisha was shot inside the second bedroom and sustained gunshot wounds in the chest and the pelvic area. Forensic examination showed that Lakeisha died from the gunshot wound to her chest after 5 to 30 minutes of being shot, and had tried to defend herself before being shot from a distance of 6 to 12 inches. Latoya was purportedly shot at about 24 inches away from the skin surface, and her death took 3 to 10 minutes, while Angela died minutes after being shot in her sleep. The police discovered the dead bodies after the family members made a report out of concern for the victims. The police eventually questioned Black as a suspect, although there was lack of physical evidence on the crime scene to connect him to the murders. The police were able to make a breakthrough and arrest Black after they matched the bullets found on the Clays to the bullet recovered in the shooting case of Angela's husband, who was shot by Black, coincidentally with the same gun that killed Angela and the girls. Black was found guilty of all 3 counts of first-degree murder in March 1998 and was subsequently sentenced to death for murdering Lakeisha, while receiving 2 consecutive life sentences for the murders of Angela and Latoya. He appealed his conviction and sentence, and after exhausting his appeals, he sought to have his death sentence commuted on the grounds of intellectual disability. However, these appeals were also denied. Currently, Black remains on death row at the Riverbend Maximum Security Institution, with his execution date set for August 5, 2025 as ordered by the Tennessee Supreme Court. Sean William Windsor. State, Kentucky. Scheduled date of execution, not defined. Sean is an American man convicted of killing his estranged wife, Betty Jean Windsor, and son, Corey Windsor, in Louisville, Kentucky in 2003. Windsor appeared on the television show America's Most Wanted twice, before viewers provided police with tips that led to his July 2004 capture in Shelby, North Carolina. While on tape, Windsor gave a bizarre and chilling account of what happened the night of the murders. At one point, he tells detectives, "I love them, man. I love them to death." During questioning, Windsor calmly describes how he killed Betty Jean and Corey. A detective asks, "How did it play out? Who checked out first and how?" "Betty did," Windsor replies. "I hit her in the head, knocked her out." He goes on to say that he hit her with a dumbbell and that his son was playing nearby with a toy truck at the time. Windsor says on the tape he also beat his son with the dumbbell. When asked if he used other weapons, Windsor replies, "I think there was a knife too, man." On the tape, Windsor says the killings were supposed to be part of a murder-suicide pact. "I guess it was a love pact." Windsor says they had already discussed the pact before Betty Jean and Corey arrived. "We had talked about it and everything. She brought Corey down. We were going to have dinner, and after we ate dinner, we were just going to do it." Windsor goes on to say that Betty Jean asked him to kill her. "She didn't have the nerve to do it. She asked me if I could do it and everything. I was scared. I didn't know if I could do it or not. I just was pacing back and forth and everything, and she was just like, 'Do it, it's what we agreed on.' And I said, 'I don't know if I can,' and I just picked it up and I just hit her in the head." Windsor was sentenced to death on November 17, 2006, and is currently on death row at the Kentucky State Penitentiary in Eddyville, Kentucky. Jeffrey Glenn Hutchinson. State, Florida. Scheduled date of execution, May 1st, 2025. Jeffrey is an American convicted mass murderer who was sentenced to death for a 1998 quadruple homicide in Crestview, Florida. On September 11, 1998, Hutchinson committed the quadruple murder of his live-in girlfriend and her 3 children at their house in Crestview, Florida. Before the slayings, Hutchinson began a relationship with his girlfriend, Renee Flaherty, and the couple began living together in 1997. Renee's 3 children, Jeffrey, Amanda, and Logan, lived with their mother, and together Hutchinson and the Flaherty family moved from Spokane, Washington to Florida. When she began a relationship with Hutchinson, Renee was estranged from her husband, a military man stationed in Alaska's Aleutian Islands. On the 18th month of the couple's cohabitation, a fierce argument broke out between Hutchinson and Renee for unspecified reasons before Hutchinson packed some of his clothes and guns into his truck and drove to a bar where he drank some alcohol and told the bartender, with whom he and Renee were acquainted with, that he was pissed off with his girlfriend. Afterwards, Hutchinson returned to the house, and using a Mossberg 12-gauge pistol-grip shotgun, Hutchinson shot and killed 32-year-old Renee and her 3 children within less than an hour after he left the bar. Hutchinson later called the police and informed them that his family had been shot, and he was subsequently arrested at the scene. Renee and her 2 younger children, 4-year-old Logan and 7-year-old Amanda, were found dead inside the bedroom, while Renee's eldest child, 9-year-old Jeffrey, was found dead inside the living room. Each of the victims was shot once in the head, with Jeffrey sustaining an additional gunshot wound to the chest. Hutchinson, who reportedly did not resist arrest, was held at the Okaloosa County Jail thereafter. During his trial, Hutchinson claimed diminished responsibility due to alcohol intoxication and mental disorders like the Gulf War syndrome in his defense. Nonetheless, he was found guilty of the mass murder and received 3 death sentences for the children's murders, as well as a life sentence for the murder of his girlfriend. Hutchinson is currently on death row, awaiting his execution at the Florida State Prison, which has been scheduled for May 1st, 2025. Gerald Frank Stanley. Gerald is an American murderer and suspected serial killer who murdered his 4th wife, Cindy Rogers Stanley, in August 1980. This was after a 4-year prison term for murdering his 2nd wife, Kathleen Stanley, in 1975. He was also a suspect in the disappearance of his 3rd wife, Diana Lynn. On January 14, 1975, Stanley approached his wife Kathleen's car. She was driving his son and her daughter to school when she pulled over at a stop sign. Stanley then opened the unlocked passenger door and fired his gun at Kathleen, killing her. He then dragged his daughter out of the car and attempted to run off with her, but instead he was tackled by witnesses and arrested. In October 1975, Stanley was convicted of 2nd-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 years in state prison. He was paroled in October 1979 after serving 4.5 years in prison. Investigators were worried that he was out in society. They became even more concerned when he met 29-year-old Cindy Rogers on July 3rd and married her 4 days later on July 7th. Days later, she went to the police and claimed Stanley was sexually assaulting her. When charges were not being pressed against him, she ran away and hid at her father's resort in Lake County. Stanley eventually tracked Rogers down to the resort. On August 11, 1980, Stanley acquired a high-powered rifle, climbed a stack of trees across the road, and aimed his gun at Rogers sitting poolside. He fired, killing her in front of her son, who was swimming in the pool. The jury convicted him of murdering Rogers, and he was sentenced to death in 1984. In 2008, a retrospective evaluation was called to determine whether Stanley was legally competent at the time of the murders. Stanley argued for his competence and attempted to replace his public defender with an attorney willing to support his claim. Stanley has repeatedly called for the court to set a firm execution date, stating in a 2011 hearing that, "I deserve the death penalty." In July 2024, the Tehama County Sheriff's Office resumed searching for the body of Stanley's 3rd wife, Diana Lynn. According to his confessions, Stanley and an unnamed accomplice buried her somewhere in the Digger Creek area of Manton in the summer of 1980, but did not specify where. The search is currently ongoing. Stephen David Catlin. State: California. Scheduled date of execution: not defined. Stephen David Catlin is a convicted American serial killer who murdered 2 wives and his adoptive mother in California and Nevada from 1974 until 1984. In April 1976, Joyce Catlin was admitted to Bakersfield's Mercy Hospital with a severe flu. She seemed to improve, then took a sudden turn for the worse and died of pneumonia in May 1976. Also, in the same month, Catlin married his 5th wife, Glenna Kay, and moved to Fresno, finding employment at a local garage. Quick promotions placed him in charge of 40 employees, but Catlin had expensive tastes, and cash was always short. On October 28, 1980, his adoptive father died suddenly, and the fluid in his lungs was attributed to cancer. Once again, the body was swiftly cremated on orders from Catlin. In 1981, Catlin's employers at the Fresno garage noticed missing auto parts. A subsequent background check turned up his criminal record, and he was forced to resign, though no charges were filed. Financially, the strain began to mount. On February 17, 1984, Glenna Kay Catlin suddenly fell ill while visiting Las Vegas with her mother. Returning to Fresno, she was hospitalized with fluid in her lungs. Physicians were still trying to diagnose her illness when she died on March 14th. Catlin, meanwhile, had received $57,000 from life insurance payments and acquired another fiancée, encountered on a visit to the hospital. Back in Bakersfield, his 3rd ex-wife had followed the series of deaths in Catlin's life, and she approached the local sheriff with suspicions. Joyce Catlin had been cremated, but the hospital retained some of her tissue samples, which were submitted for analysis in November 1984. A few days later, on December 8th, Catlin's mother, Martha, collapsed and died from a stroke, shortly after a visit by Catlin and his fiancée. Catlin had ordered that his mother's body be cremated, but the process was postponed until an autopsy could be performed. Analysis of tissue samples from his mother and his 2 late wives revealed that all had suffered poisoning from paraquat, a highly toxic herbicide. A bottle of paraquat, complete with Catlin's fingerprints, was found in his garage. On December 23, 1985, Catlin was charged in Kern County with the 1976 murder of Joyce Catlin, his 4th wife, and the 1984 murder of Martha Catlin, his mother. Shortly after marrying his 6th and final wife, Catlin was indicted for the murder of his 5th wife, Glenna Kay Catlin. Catlin's trial for this murder was held in Monterey County, owing to pretrial publicity before the Kern County trial. In April 1986, he was convicted of Glenna Kay's murder, and the jury fixed a penalty of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. On June 1, 1990, a Kern County jury returned a guilty verdict on the murder counts of Joyce and Martha Catlin. The jury agreed with the prosecution's allegations of special circumstances. These were murders for financial gain, murders by poison, and multiple murders. On June 6, 1990, the jury fixed Catlin's penalty as death. The fact that Catlin had already been convicted for Glenna Kay's murder was not introduced until after the verdict. Sentenced to death in 1990, he is currently housed in San Quentin State Prison, Mitchell Willoughby, State, Kentucky. Scheduled date of execution not defined. Mitchell Willoughby was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder in 1984, not solely for the death of his wife, but also for the deaths of 2 men. The victims' bodies were found in the Kentucky River. Willoughby initially claimed to have killed all 3 victims while firing with a gun in each hand. Mitchell Willoughby had a turbulent relationship with his wife. Before her murder, there were reports of domestic issues. Police discovered Jacqueline's body in the Kentucky River on April 27, 1983. She had been shot multiple times, which pointed to a violent crime. Willoughby initially reported her disappearance, but suspicions grew quickly. Norman and Durham's bodies were also found in the Kentucky River shortly after Jacqueline's. Reports stated that they had been out with Willoughby before their deaths. They were shot and dumped in the river, similar to Jacqueline. During the trial, Willoughby claimed he acted in a rage, but did not provide a convincing defense. Evidence suggested premeditated murder, leading to his conviction for all 3 murders. The jury found him guilty on July 22, 1983, for the murders of Joe Norman, Joey Durham, and Jacqueline. If you like the way we create these videos and you want us to bring more cases like this to light, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives.